The Trump administration is taking aim at a major Canadian export. The U.S. Commerce Department is hiking anti-dumping duties on Canadian softwood lumber to 20.56%. Recovered late morning. Lumber futures are of course higher given the news on the 25% tariff on Canada. There is already a 14.5% duty on Canadian lumber. Ottawa says it has a plan to fight back against new U.S. duties on Canadian lumber. This is another unjustified tariff. You can expect us to fight against it, and you can expect us to take specific steps to protect those workers. American leaders have boasted that the United States doesn't need Canadian lumber, claiming that America's own forests can supply all the wood it needs. That bold claim is about to be tested in a way no one expected. In the past year, a quiet trade dispute over timber has spiraled into a full-blown standoff. It started with a sudden tariff hike that sent shockwaves through the construction industry, and it quickly provoked an unprecedented response from Canada. One side is slapping duties, the other is threatening to choke off the supply of a critical building material. Analysts are warning this clash could add $14,000 to the cost of building an average home by 2027. And that is just the beginning. Before we begin, make sure to hit the like button. It helps us beat the YouTube algorithm. Imagine waking up to find that nearly 1/3 of the lumber used in American homes might disappear overnight from U.S. markets. That scenario is now very real. In a surprise move at dawn on July 12, Washington erected a tariff wall 35% high on every Canadian lumber shipment entering the country. Within hours, alarm bells were ringing across the border. Canada's largest lumber-producing provinces hinted they might hit back by tightening the taps on wood exports. In fact, the Premier of British Columbia told Bloomberg News that export quotas, a hard limit on lumber headed south, are on the table to ease the trade friction. Suddenly, America's lifeline of softwood was in jeopardy. One industry report warned that this tariff alone, if met with Canadian retaliation, could add about $10,000 to the price of a new single-family house within a couple of years. Builders are already saying they haven't seen a timber supply squeeze this brutal since the Second World War. But this aggressive quota threat from Canada is only the opening move in a much larger chess match. Cut off the wood and you don't just stall home construction. You start to rewrite the entire North American supply chain. What happens when every 2x4 plank becomes a bargaining chip between nations? Stick around because this escalating standoff is on the verge of reshaping the economy on both sides of the border. And in a moment, we will reveal a surprising strategy one side is hiding up its sleeve that could completely flip the script of this trade war. Before we continue, make sure to hit the subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow. The ticking clock on this conflict actually started months earlier. On August 19, 2024, the U.S. Commerce Department quietly raised tariffs on Canadian softwood lumber to 14.54%, nearly doubling the previous rate. Canada blasted that move as punitive, but it was only a taste of what was to come. That initial duty hike was a lightning strike through the heart of a critical supply pipeline, one that delivers roughly 30% of all the lumber used in American homes. According to trade analysts, the volume of Canadian wood at risk could have framed every single house the U.S. began building last year. In other words, if that wood supply were suddenly lost, it would be as if every home construction project from the year before had its lumber vanish. Builders felt the sting almost immediately. The National Association of Home Builders, NAHB, warned that this tariff-driven wood shortage could tack on an extra $7,500 to $10,000 to the cost of constructing a typical single-family home. And this hit is coming at the worst possible time, just as mortgage interest rates hover around 7%, pushing home ownership further out of reach for many families. The result was an instant sticker shock in construction budgets. And unfortunately, that was only phase one of the unfolding crisis. By July 12 of the next year, Washington dramatically escalated the fight with that 35% blanket tariff on Canadian lumber. This was an unprecedented increase, and it landed like a hammer blow on the industry. Within hours of the tariff taking effect, reports emerged that Ontario, one of Canada's key lumber-producing regions, had effectively twisted the valve to choke off its softwood exports to the United States. Lumber convoys slowed to a trickle. To put the impact in perspective, consider this. Canada ships about 28 million cubic meters of softwood lumber to the US in a typical year. That is roughly 1/3 of all the lumber that gets nailed into houses, apartments, and other buildings across America annually. If those exports are cut off or capped, US builders would lose a volume of wood equivalent to 16 Empire State Buildings every month. The Wall Street Journal warns that even a partial shortage of that magnitude could slap an extra $10,000 onto the price of a single-family home. Builders across the country are saying they haven't felt a timber crunch this severe since wartime rationing in the 1940s. Why can't America just produce more lumber to make up the difference? Domestic sawmills would love to fill the gap, but ramping up production isn't as easy as flipping a switch. Multiple barriers are holding back a quick surge in U.S. lumber output. Regulatory red tape. Opening new logging areas or expanding mills often faces lengthy environmental and permitting processes. These regulations slow down how quickly companies can increase timber harvesting or mill capacity. Labor shortages. The forestry and mill industries are struggling to find enough skilled workers. Even existing mills can't simply add a third shift if they don't have the crews to run it. Resource constraints. Recent wildfires and sustainable harvest limits have reduced accessible timber in some U.S. regions. There is only so much lumber that can be cut without damaging future supply. These factors mean that even as prices rise, U.S. lumber producers cannot instantly fill the void left by dwindling Canadian imports. Industry experts say boosting domestic capacity is a matter of years, not months, too slow to solve an immediate crisis. So, as the U.S. tariff wall went up and American mills struggled to pick up the slack, the stage was set for a drastic Canadian response. And it came swiftly. By mid-July, headlines were flashing that Canada was finally ready to weaponize its lumber supply. On July 16, 2025, a Reuters report revealed a dramatic shift in Canada's strategy. For the first time ever, officials openly discussed imposing an export quota on lumber headed to the United States. In simple terms, Ottawa was poised to cap how much wood its companies could sell to America. The goal, to safeguard Canadian jobs and ensure ample supply for their own domestic building boom, even if it meant U.S. buyers would be left scrambling for wood. British Columbia's Premier David A. indicated he was willing to set formal limits on outbound lumber, a stark about-face after years of Canada trying to avoid such measures. The moment any quota or ceiling is put in place, every 2x4 coming out of Canada effectively turns into a rationed commodity for American builders. Why would Canada take such a drastic step? One reason is that Canadian mills are already humming to meet demand at home. In Ontario, for example, sawmills have been running at over 80% capacity to feed a booming green construction push domestically. Canada is investing heavily in sustainable building projects. Think energy-efficient homes and tall wooden buildings, which require a lot of lumber. Those local needs would be first in line if exports are restricted, meaning Canadian wood would stay north of the border to support Canadian construction workers and projects. In blunt terms, if Ottawa turns the screws on lumber exports, U.S. importers could suddenly lose a huge chunk of their supply virtually overnight. Alternative sources for lumber are extremely limited. The United States could try to buy more wood from Europe. Countries like Germany and Sweden have sent shipments when North America was short. But together, those two nations exported just about 3.5 million cubic meters of softwood lumber to the U.S. in 2023, only a small fraction of what Canada sends. And European lumber comes with longer shipping times and higher transportation costs, making it a pricey and slow substitute. Other countries simply don't have the capacity or logistics to fill America's giant lumber appetite quickly. All of this means the U.S. doesn't have an easy plan B if Canada's lumber becomes scarce. At the same time, prices on commodity markets are already signaling panic. Lumber futures, the contracts that traders buy, essentially betting on the price of wood, reached $650 per thousand board feet in March, a level not seen since a previous shortage. Some analysts warn that if Canada's export quotas truly bite into supply, those futures could lurch towards $765 or higher. In fact, if the worst-case quotas land before autumn, Prices might even vault past the record highs of the early 2020s when a combination of pandemic disruptions and building booms sent lumber costs soaring. For context, those high lumber prices in 2021 added tens of thousands of dollars to the cost of a new house. A repeat spike would erase the brief relief builders felt when lumber prices normalized and would heap fresh costs onto every starter home and renovation project in America. Economists are already flashing warning lights. A Reuters survey noted that U.S. single-family housing starts were at an 11-month low even before these quota threats, and that was largely due to high interest rates. If the lumber supply truly gets choked off, those home construction numbers could sink even further, dragging the housing market down just as it was trying to stabilize. In other words, this lumber fight isn't just another squabble in the long saga of U.S.-Canada trade disputes. It has morphed into a structural threat to the American dream of home ownership, potentially sawing off the bottom rung of the housing ladder for many families. Canada's counter moves are hitting the U.S. where Washington least expected. And they're not limited to just withholding raw logs. Remember that surprising strategy we hinted at earlier? Here is the reveal. Canada has a backup plan that could completely undercut U.S. leverage. Ottawa is not only considering quotas, it's also looking beyond the United States entirely, finding new customers for its wood. In fact, Canadian officials have pointed out that they have lucrative alternatives thanks to recent trade deals. Under the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTP, a major trade pact among 11 Pacific Rim countries, tariffs on 100% of Canadian forest products will eventually drop to zero. That means countries like Japan, Australia, and Singapore can buy Canadian lumber and wood products tariff-free, paying the true market price, while American buyers are stuck paying a hefty surcharge due to their own government's duties. In addition, Canada has a free trade agreement with Europe, Canada-EU Trade Agreement or CETA, which also allows many wood products to enter European markets duty-free. In effect, Canada is telling its lumber industry, if the U.S. makes itself an unprofitable market with tariffs and quotas, we have other places to send our wood. Canadian strategists are already nudging their timber companies in this new direction rather than just exporting raw 2x4s and logs, which face high U.S. tariffs. Mills are being encouraged to shift toward higher margin, value-added wood products. These include things like engineered wood panels, prefabricated wall sections, and finished cabinetry. Why? Because these products can often bypass the harshest trade penalties and even qualify for duty-free treatment under deals like the CPTP and CETA. Essentially, Canada is preparing to sell finished wood constructions. Think of entire building components or high-end woods to other countries. Instead of shipping raw lumber to the U.S. at a big discount, Canada's emerging strategy can be summed up in a few key moves. Impose export quotas. Limit the volume of raw lumber sent to the U.S., securing enough supply for domestic needs and putting pressure on U.S. markets. Redirect exports to new markets. Take advantage of trade agreements like the CPTP to sell lumber and wood products to Asia-Pacific countries at competitive prices without any tariffs. At the same time, tap into Europe's demand via CETA, where Canadian wood can enter freely. Increase value-added production. Encourage Canadian mills to produce more engineered wood, prefab building materials, and finished goods. These products fetch higher prices and often avoid the U.S. tariffs that raw lumber faces, allowing Canada to move up the value chain and keep more profit at home. Roadside diners and family-owned restaurants that sit along the routes from the border have started closing a couple of hours earlier each night because the dinner rush just never shows up. Employees are getting fewer hours, and some businesses worry they might have to cut staff if things don't pick up. There's a psychological chill setting in as well, especially among Canadian consumers. On May 28, 2025, a research firm called Dunhee released a survey that should make U.S. retailers nervous. 71% of Canadian consumers said they plan to buy fewer U.S.-made grocery products this year. That is a huge shift in consumer sentiment, and it's fueled not by any shortage or economic necessity, but by emotion and principle. Many Canadians are angry about the U.S. lumber tariffs and other trade measures. They're feeling a sense of national pride in supporting their own products instead, and perhaps a bit of suspicion, a fear that if they get too used to U.S. goods, Another trade flare-up could make those goods pricier or scarce. This kind of consumer resolve can cut deeper than any official tariff because it's a voluntary boycott. It's people saying, "Fine, if that's how you're going to treat us. We just won't buy your stuff." Retail strategists are warning that if even half of those Canadian shoppers actually follow through on this intention, the effect on U.S. businesses will be profound. American chain stores near the border, from big box retailers in Buffalo to grocery stores in Detroit to outlet malls in Washington state, could lose up to 1/3 of their weekend revenue. Weekends are key because that's traditionally when Canadian families would drive over for a day of shopping in the U.S. Losing 1/3 of that business means slimmer profits and tougher times for those store managers who were counting on cross-border traffic, especially as concurrently those stores are also grappling with higher costs for inventory due to tariffs on raw materials. The Chamber of Commerce in Buffalo has dubbed this phenomenon a double freeze. First, Ottawa effectively freezes the flow of lumber and other goods southward by imposing quotas or just by the fact of the trade dispute. Then, in reaction, everyday Canadians freeze their spending at U.S. shops. For communities near the border, it's a 1-2 punch. The industries like lumber and manufacturing get hit, and so do the retail and service sectors that rely on friendly cross-border relations. It's important to note that Washington cannot simply fix this problem with a policy band-aid. You can slap tariffs on goods, but you can't compel foot traffic with an executive order. No law can force Canadian tourists to visit or require Canadian families to choose Florida oranges over Ontario apples. Ottawa knows this and is likely banking on the pressure it creates. The longer those border mall parking lots stay half-empty, the more local U.S. business owners and county officials will complain and push their representatives in Congress to find a resolution. It becomes a domestic political problem for the U.S. government. Angry voters, not because of foreign competition, but because of lost foreign customers. Yet, from the White House's perspective, rolling back tariffs too quickly could look like a sign of weakness, especially in an election cycle where both major parties might be trying to look tough on trade. It's a delicate balance, alleviating the pain of local businesses versus maintaining a posture of strength on the national stage. In the meantime, the visual of those empty parking lots and quiet customs lanes is broadcasting a silent headline. This trade war now walks on 2 feet. One foot is official policy, the tariffs and quotas set by governments. The other foot is consumer choice, the deliberate decisions by individuals to change their shopping and spending habits. Both are now marching steadily away from American storefronts and suppliers. If this trend continues, it underscores a sobering truth. Once trade tensions seep into the public consciousness and wallets, they take on a life of their own that's hard to reverse. Remember to hit like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. Your support means a lot.